Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to this opening press conference of the first Hamburg Sustainability Conference. Moin moin to all of you here in the Chamber of Commerce in Hamburg, and also hello to all the colleagues that can follow us from pretty much anywhere else in the world via live stream. This is the opening press conference by the 4 co-initiators of the Hamburg Sustainability Conference, these being Svenja Schulze, the German Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development, Dr. Peter Tschentscher, the first mayor of the Free and Hanseatic City of Hamburg, Achim Steiner, the administrator of the UN Development Programme, UNDP, and Professor Dr. Michael Otto, the chairman of the Supervisory Board of Otto Group. We have 30 minutes, so up until 9 o'clock. And we would start with a round of introductory remarks by the 4 co-initiators and then have time for your questions, of course. Before we start with that, just one housekeeping issue. This press conference will be conducted partly in English and partly in German. So if you require translation, we provide headsets with simultaneous German-English, English-German translation. If you require a headset and haven't gotten one yet, please just raise your hand and our colleagues in the back will provide you with one immediately. Okay, great. So without further ado, würde ich gerne das Wort an Sie weitergeben, Frau Ministerin.
Ja, herzlichen Dank, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren. Heute beginnt hier wirklich etwas Neues, nämlich die erste Hamburg Sustainability Conference, die erste internationale Hamburger Nachhaltigkeitskonferenz. Und weitere werden von nun an jährlich folgen und auch mit handfesten Ergebnissen dazu beitragen, dass die 17 UN-Nachhaltigkeitsziele Stück für Stück erreicht werden. Der heutige 7. Oktober markiert auch den ersten Jahrestag des schrecklichen Terrorangriffs der Hamas auf Israel, dessen Opfer wir heute natürlich gedenken. Ein Ereignis, das Folgen weit über die Region hinaus mit unschuldigen Toten auf allen Seiten ausgelöst hat und die Weltgemeinschaft weiter gespalten hat. Nicht vergessen dürfen wir auch die anderen Kriege und Konflikte, wie etwa den russischen Angriffskrieg in der Ukraine oder den Bürgerkrieg im Sudan. Und überall sterben und leiden unschuldige Menschen, und das alles schreit nach mehr Multilateralismus, noch mehr diplomatischen Anstrengungen. Wenn wir auf dieser Konferenz hier über klimaneutrale Schifffahrt, eine sozialgerechte Transformation unserer Volkswirtschaften oder über eine faire internationale Finanzarchitektur sprechen, dann finde ich das gerade an so einem Tag wie heute
on this particular day, I believe that it is encouraging to hold such a conference because it goes to show that there are not only wars and conflicts, but also many people and organizations who want to work together and showcase this and do so in very concrete terms here in Hamburg. We all know that only with more collaboration can we solve global problems, and the nationalists here and also in many other countries who want isolationists, who promote isolationist tendencies, would make all of us poorer. So we have the basic consensus here in Hamburg that we're all better off if we work together than against one another. You're aware that 2 weeks ago in New York at the United Nations headquarters, an agreement was reached towards the future. Russia tried to interfere with it, but the vast majority, led by the African states, thwarted this attempt, and this was a very strong vote for multilateralism, for the principle of global collaboration. And based on this vote, we're holding this conference. Essentially, we're leaving the negotiation offices in New York and we're going towards the workplace, the workbench, so to speak. We're doing this in Hamburg very consciously, the gate to the world, and we're bringing together a mixture of people who you might not meet at international conferences. We have more than 1,600 individuals from more than hundreds of countries, from politics, the private sector, civil society, as well as the scientific community, from the north, the south, the east, and the west. And this mixture, this blend, if you will, allows us to forge new alliances to move towards concrete solutions for a more sustainable world. And I would also like to mention a couple of examples of where we will see progress today. For example, global shipping. It emits more CO2 than the country of Germany, and we're in dire need of solutions so that shipping can become climate neutral. We do have these solutions. Fuels based on green hydrogen produced with electricity from renewable sources. But in order to implement this, we need many different actors, many different stakeholders. You need the producers of these renewable fuels. You need companies who can then transport these green fuels, but also the ports who then offer those green fuels. You need the shipping companies who then purchase them. We need governments creating the necessary environment. So there are many different interfaces, and this requires a lot of collaboration, and it allows for a lot of potential. So now, today, we are uniting all of the different moving parts of this value-creating chain, and we want to reach agreements for a concrete type of collaboration going beyond this day today. So overall, at this conference, we have participants in 60 different sessions. They're going to be creative. We call this co-creation, and I'm convinced that this leitmotif of this Hamburg Sustainability Conference, co-creation, developing things together, is exactly the right path towards a sustainable world. And that is why I am happy to hold this conference here in Hamburg today. Mr. Tschentscher. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to you here in Hamburg to this first International Sustainability Conference. We feel honored to host this conference here in Hamburg. The minister just mentioned it, the meaning which we assigned to this conference, and I would like to thank my co-initiators, the four of us here on this panel, so that together we had this idea for an international conference. We were able to develop it and to hold this conference here in Hamburg. We do think that this is an appropriate place for such a conference. Ms. Schulze just mentioned the meaning of international cooperation. She alluded to it, and this is something that characterizes Hamburg. The fact that through our port, we establish connections towards the entire world. So this international atmosphere is very important for the SDGs of the United Nations, because global objectives can only be reached together, globally, through cooperation. And this is why we have invited countries from all over the world, stakeholders, heads of state, representatives of, say, NGOs, people representing the private sector, from the scientific community, in order to talk together with us about how we can be more consistent and how we can achieve these SDGs of the United Nations. This is a very complex field. In Hamburg last year, for the first time, we published a sustainability report for the city of Hamburg. So the individual SDGs, we allotted them to the individual fields relevant in our city, and we mentioned how far we're along with this process towards achieving these goals, which is, of course, a complicated endeavor. Our experience, however, says that difficult objectives can be reached most easily with good partners. We also have a long-standing tradition, so that us as politicians, together with the private sectors and civil society representatives, work on the most important fields. And this principle of international cooperation to unite those who can give good examples, who can provide us with best practices, but learning from other projects, to get these people together to such a yearly international conference in order to give examples, in order to foster this exchange, to assess the experiences which different projects have produced. I think it's great that the minister is also a friend of the maritime sector of the economy, because this is a field in which we're very active. I mean, the port in general is a place where sustainability actually takes its shape. We produce sustainable energies there. We are able to import regenerative fuels from all over the world. The decarbonization of the industry is being tried and it is being implemented. And all of those are things that we would like to do together with other major port cities and things that we would like to share. So I would like to thank you for holding this conference in Hamburg, for being our guests. I'm very much looking forward to the different panels, the discussions, etc. And I'm glad that the Federal Chancellor is also here today for this inaugural event and has established these excellent contacts to other countries. It is important to bring together experts for the organizations to get together, but that it becomes clear, crystal clear, that we're providing a framework and that this discussion on sustainability, the SDGs of the United Nations, we support them. And within this framework, we provide everybody with the opportunity to participate. Hopefully we'll get some tailwind from this conference, some new momentum, because we do need quick progress when it comes to climate change and when working towards the SDGs. So this conference is supposed to really foster this endeavor. Thank you very much. Mr. Steiner.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, dear First Mayor, dear Michael Otto. It's a pleasure to join the initiators of this first Hamburg Sustainability Conference here in Hamburg, the great global gateway that Germany has had for centuries, in both engaging with the rest of the world, but also in welcoming the world. And in that sense, I was delighted when we were approaching the United Nations Development Programme to become a partner in this Hamburg Sustainability Conference. We are here at a difficult time for the world. And therefore, there inevitably will be some who are saying, is this a time to have an international conference on sustainability? I think, as both the Minister and the First Mayor already said, if not now, when? When the world is struggling to cooperate, to find common cause, and to be able to solve problems that it can only solve together, even if sometimes countries are not the greatest friends, then this is something that should give everyone in Germany, and indeed everybody across the world, some sense of hope. The Hamburg Sustainability Conference is not a magic tool, but it is, as the Minister also said, following just now on a summit of the future that the United Nations hosted in New York just a couple of weeks ago, a reminder that, yes, the world can still find common cause. We passed the Pact for the Future, we adopted a Digital Global Compact, and both of these already are indications that despite all the tensions in the world, those things that we actually are agreed on, we need to work together on, are many. And to have in Hamburg now the opportunity to bring together not those who design intentionality, but those who work on the practicality of this, is a tremendous privilege. I lead an organization that every day across 170 countries, not least because of also German support, is able to help countries envisage the future, whether it is to eradicate poverty or to land in the digital age and to see, for instance, artificial intelligence not as something that happens somewhere else, but that will drive development in their societies, in their economies. What we have assembled here, and we are very proud to have worked with not just the other three initiators, co-initiators of this conference, but literally with dozens of organizations from all over the world, is the frontier not only of thinking, but the frontier of doing. Being able to change what happens next in the world is not just dreaming. It is actually how change happens. And we have assembled here in Hamburg some of the leading pioneers, be it on the technology front, on green shipping, green aviation, green hydrogen, just to mention a few examples, but also the future of food. How are we going to be able to feed 8 billion people in this world without degrading the very assets that nature has given us? All of these are questions that are not hypothetical. Climate change is already raging across the world. We are losing every year a net amount of arable land because of the way that we farm in order to feed ourselves. And yet, and this is really my main message, development is an extraordinary unifying concept. Investing in one another across a world of great inequality and also sometimes responsibility, take carbon emissions, is the way in which we create hope. Seeing each other not as enemies, seeing our neighbor not as a threat, but as a potential partner, seeing the developing world not just as a recipient, but rather as a partner in investing in solutions, this is what the United Nations stands for today. This is what UNDP brings also as a partner to this conference. And let me tell you, The Sustainable Development Goals are indeed struggling in terms of the targets we set ourselves in 2015. But let me also say, because this is sometimes forgotten, just because we haven't reached the targets we set ourselves doesn't mean we are not making progress. We are seeing an energy revolution unfold across the world. If you want to be hopeful, just remember that last year, 50%, the electricity infrastructure that was installed with renewables was 50% of the total. In fact, we now have more investments in renewables worldwide than in oil, gas, coal, and nuclear put together. These are the advances, the success stories of working together, including through a sometimes painfully slow climate change convention. One last figure I want to leave you with, because technology is such a central debate at this meeting here also. In 1995, there were merely 16 million people who had access to the internet, to broadband. Next year, it will be over 6 billion people. That's more people than were alive in 1995. So do not let those who say there is no hope and there is no scope for progress or no scope for cooperation and multilateralism to mislead you. This is how we move together into the future, and Hamburg hopefully will become an annual moment where we remind ourselves that we have so much more that we share with one another than that which divides us. Thank you.
Herr Dr. Otto.
Ja, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren,
Otto, ladies and gentlemen, I too would like to welcome you to the first Hamburg Sustainability Conference. Apart from state actors, next to state actors, I and my foundation represent civil society, and as an entrepreneur I represent business. Business, of course, has benefited from globalization in many ways. Global development, but that ignores the principles of sustainability, endangers this success and the future of our planet. This is why companies also have a vital interest in the achievement of the SDGs. However, at the moment, it doesn't look quite like that might happen. When the SDGs were agreed on, that was a moment of success for multilateralism, but the implementation phase isn't going fast enough. Poverty is increasing, species are disappearing, and this weighs heavy on multilateral cooperation, but it also endangers the life of future generations. Companies are often the reason why SDGs are not achieved. For instance, when they require too many resources or have unfortunate conditions in their supply chains. However, on the other hand, they can also offer solutions that help, that further the achievement of the SDGs. We are opening the Hamburg Sustainability Conference today, and hence are starting a conference cycle for the next years that should provide momentum for the acceleration of the SDGs. We have to do more. We have to take more action and talk a little less. We have talked enough. At this Hamburg Sustainability Conference, we will be looking at what can be done in very concrete terms and what needs to be developed rather fast. From 3 decades of sustainability management, my experience shows me that good ideas are often not implemented because the framework conditions aren't given, and that's why good ideas often remain in their initiation phase. The market does not react, and that happens across many sectors. The Michael Otto Foundation has a long tradition of dialogue, and that is why we present initiatives that can be exemplary for solutions of systemic effect. But, as I said, politics are also required in order to create the right framework conditions, and businesses are required in order to turn one example into many examples. A dialogue between politics, businesses and civil society is very important for me here at this HSC. And I'm talking particularly also about academia to come up with innovative ideas and test them for sustainability. Then there is civil society, acceptance from the citizens. It is only through this dialogue that concepts can be generated that can actually have pioneering effects. Concepts or pioneering concepts that work, that are scalable, that is what we are interested in. You cannot do that overnight. That is why it is important for us to turn this Hamburg Sustainability Conference into a cycle of conferences that allows us to think big. We are also interested in the phases between the conferences that will take place on a yearly basis. These will be marked by round tables and co-creation processes in order to deepen the processes and prepare the next conferences ahead. With this initiative, we want to create something that is long-lasting, something that can affect important and positive change. Thank you.
This gives us roughly 10 minutes for our Q&A session. If you have a question, please just raise your hand. You can ask your questions in either English or German. My colleague with the microphone, here, over there, will come to you. Please introduce yourself and tell us which medium you're working for. Thank you.
I'm Neil Kamal. I'm from Times of India. So as we stood for sustainability, what we see a lot of conflicts in many regions. Under those circumstances, what is the status to achieve the SDGs of different parameters, maybe by 2030, as mainly hunger and energy transition?
Well, thank you for your question. And I think I understood you with the Times of India.
Yeah.
Yes. So let's for a moment just reflect your question in terms of India. I mean, you have had some remarkable breakthroughs in some of the aspects of the SDGs. Take poverty eradication. In India, literally hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of extreme poverty in the last 15 to 20 years. We have seen also in another area, and I met yesterday with the Minister Joshi, who is also attending this conference here, on India's extraordinary story when it comes to transitioning towards a renewable energy infrastructure. India is today one of the world's leading investors in the energy transition. Yes, it depends on fossil fuels, but it also has to double energy production over the next 10 to 15 years. The ability to do so is heavily invested in making renewables an integral part of India's electricity infrastructure. So the story of the Sustainable Development Goals is clearly one of many different aspects. We set ourselves targets and indicators in 2015, as I said, when the world was in a different place. We hadn't had COVID. We didn't have what we now have, which is a financial and debt crisis across the world, and therefore many countries are struggling. We actually have over 50 countries who now have to divert their health and education budgets to service the interest payments of their debt. So in many ways, we have a disrupted moment, but it doesn't mean that neither the goals are not relevant anymore, nor that countries are not continuing to invest. And I always say this, yes, we are not meeting the targets we set ourselves, but on most goals in most countries across the world, we are still making progress. What we are trying to do, including with a conference like this one here in Hamburg, is to identify what are the greatest breakthrough opportunities, where are the best partnerships we can find, and they will run across, as Michael Otto said, all the different parts, science and entrepreneurship, developed countries, developing countries, large nations, small nations. These are the partnerships we need to get the SDGs back on track, and that is very much the objective that was also reaffirmed by the United Nations at the General Assembly session this year. Thank you.
Wonderful. More questions? Entschuldigung, da hinten, die Dame im
Over there at the back, the lady in red. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me well. My name is Kaiti Gallos. I'm an international moderator and freelance journalist. You talked about sustainability and bringing the world together for these global challenges that we have to face. Sustainability. I wondered, how is the Global South now present at this conference, especially when it comes to lower and middle income countries? How are they integrated on the stages, on the panels? How do you work together to really bring the world together? Thank you.
Genau. Also die Zusammensetzung der Konferenz, darauf hat Michael
The composition of this conference, and this is also something that Mr. Otto mentioned earlier on. And let me say, first of all, that it's not only about this conference, it's not only about these 2 days, it's about the entire process that led up to this conference and that will lead up to next year's conference. All of this is marked by our collaboration. It's a co-creation process that we are engaged in order to elaborate the solutions. So we want to jointly work on on this in order to develop joint solutions, and we do that together with countries from the Global South. With regard to the number of participants, I can say the following. We didn't expect to see so many participants from the European context because this is the first conference, but to see 1,600 people signing up and taking part here, that is a significant figure. And hence, the share of those from the Global South stands at around a little more than 20%. So that is the very active participants here. We have around 42% women, which is also unusual for an international conference. Normally, the share of men is significantly higher. We have around 20% from the private sector. We have many heads of state and government present today, and that also shows just what kind of attention we have generated here. Mia Mottley, Minister of Barbados, the recently elected Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Cameroon. So we do also have a number of representatives from the Global South at the level of heads of state and government.
Vielen Dank. Dann der Kollege hier auf der linken
Thank
Seite.
you. Then my colleague here on the left, please, and then the colleague from the DPA.
Norddeutscher Rundfunk.
Dieter Lehmann, Norddeutscher Rundfunk. A question to Mrs. Schulze, and maybe Mr. Steiner can also respond to this. Is there a criterion, or are there criteria where you can say, this is where we have been successful, or we can consider this conference a success if we have achieved this criteria? Well, I think at a time where the world is marked by crises and conflicts and wars, we can say that in less than a year we have managed to find not only a format, but also a topic that looks at the issue of sustainability in the context of all of the global events at the moment. And that in itself is a success. But of course, getting people, bringing people together is not enough in itself. If you look at the program, and you can see that we have different workshops planned today, and there are a number of very concrete results that we can achieve. But of course, another aim of this conference is also to further partnerships and new partnerships. And now, with regard to the participation and the cooperation of many organizations, we have already achieved our interim goal. Namely, in this world that is marked by so many tensions, we wanted to send a different message, to show that cooperation, especially when it comes to the future, the development of the future, and to see that this is not only an issue of joint interest, but that it also includes businesses. And I want to follow up on what Mr. Otto said earlier on. From the very beginning, we were interested in having participants from the businesses here, from the agricultural industry, from the entire food industry that sustains us globally. These are areas in which we can use research and technology and very targeted sustainability politics in order to create new momentum. So I think coming out of this conference, we will have many examples for how you can get many partners together in a very short time. But for next year and for this conference, our goal will of course be to achieve a much higher level of ambition, to insert that into these discussions, because the answers to the future are not piecemeal. We have to actually tackle very big challenges here. And we have to also be credible and show that partnerships and cooperation are not a concept of the past. Because currently, many countries are losing their trust in international cooperation on both sides. And that is something that we would also like to counter with this conference. Because the conferences serve the creation of alliances, networking, to show best practice, but also to think about how you can roll out certain initiatives, how you can roll them out to new regions, for instance. And the conference is, of course, 2 days are not enough in order to achieve that. And that is why, in between these conferences, we would also like to hold relevant events in order to further develop things that can then be presented at the next conference. In doing so, we want to show that we're moving things forward, because that's what it's about. It's not a conference just like many others that you walk out of and say, well, it was nice having talked about all of this. No, we actually want to put words into action. And that is something we want to achieve through these roundtable conversations between the conferences. And then the next conference will come, and we're hoping that that will be continued in the next couple of years. I understand your remark, but you haven't said, well, we're going to do these conferences until 2030 or whatever. Well, we've planned it for 3 years because, of course, we want to gain experience. This is the first conference, and of course, we will learn a lot from it. At the next one, lots of things will have changed or improved. So we are intent on learning. After 3 years, we will make a summary to look at whether our expectations were fulfilled or whether we need to completely change course. But that is why, for now, we have set a 3-year horizon. Okay, last question. Could you let me know who finances this conference and how high the costs are exactly? This conference is financed by the BMZ, the Ministry for Development, by the City of Hamburg, and by my foundation.
Größenordnung ist ein einstelliger Millionenbetrag.
It is a one-digit million figure in terms of its costs. And I think we can move a lot with that level of financing, but experience will tell too.
We're running out of time, but maybe have time for one more question. The lady there on the left, thank you.
Hi, Libby George with Reuters. I have a question for Mr. Steiner. You mentioned earlier the challenges with the enormous amount of debt that particularly developing countries have now and their troubles in repaying it. Wondering if you could talk a little bit about how big a threat you think that is to meeting sustainable development goals and what the international community can do to address it.
Well, sometimes one can answer this with the simplest of terms. Money makes the world go round. And right now, we are actually finding ourselves in a situation where the issue of debt and indebtedness has become a major challenge, not only for citizens across the world. This is why debates about budgets and deficits and economic growth and interest rates have become such a preoccupation of people everywhere in the world. But let me tell you, as the United Nations Development Programme, every day we are monitoring the impact of what has happened over the last few years. For many least developed countries, they have literally been priced out of the financial markets. They cannot borrow any more money. They must, in a sense, in order to avoid a default, service their debts by literally drawing down the budgets that invest in human capital. It's a very extreme situation. Then we have challenges such as climate change, which require of us literally generational levels of investment in transitions. We are asking developing countries to jump much faster than they would by history or by their emissions footprint normally be expected to do so, and yet we largely offer them the opportunity to borrow more money. This is going to be a challenge also at the climate conference in Baku. We need to find a new way in which we can mobilize the kinds of co-investments that are needed. But the SDGs are struggling right now because in virtually every country across the world, but particularly in poorer countries, investing in the kind of transitions that the Sustainable Development Goals envisage, whether it's on gender, on energy, on poverty, on industrialization, biodiversity, requires us to invest. And this is, for us, very troubling because in a world where last year we spent $2,400 billion on military and defense expenditures, we are struggling to find even 200 billion to invest in our common future. This is the contradiction of our time, and it is one that I'm very pleased we're also going to be discussing here in Hamburg, because we have the managing director of the International Monetary Fund here, we have the president of the World Bank here, we have leaders from the United Nations, from civil society. We have to tackle this issue of our international financial architecture and our international financial system. If not, we are going to fall apart in our endeavor to find answers that our citizens are expecting us to find. So financing is absolutely central. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. Having an eye on the clock, I'm afraid we have to wrap it up at this point. Just one last logistical note for all the colleagues here in the room. If you were planning to go over to the City Hall now to cover the handshakes and the opening panel with Chancellor Scholz, please wait here in the back in the foyer, and our colleagues will lead the way over to the City Hall. So please wait here. Well, Well, that's it. Thank you very much for your interest in the Hamburg Sustainability Conference, and I wish us all a very fruitful 2 days.